I've recently taken an interest in hammock camping, and I quickly realized that I needed an underquilt. My brother-in-law has an underquilt by Enlightened Equipment, and it's called the Revolt. It's a down quilt, and it is, I think, 130 bucks or so. A little bit more than I was wanting to pay for an underquilt, and so I decided to make one based on the Enlightened Equipment design, and this is it. It took way longer than I expected, and it was definitely the hardest sewing project that I've ever done. And as the project went on, my video skills dropped more and more. So I'd like to first show you the quilt in its completion and show you how it hangs outside on the hammock. And then after that, if you still have interest, you can watch my clips on how I put this together. So let's take a look at it in more detail here. Okay, where to begin? This side is the side that goes towards the hammock, and there is a difference between this side and the other side, and that is the dimensions. This one is roughly 4 inches on each side shorter than the other side. And that's one thing that makes it difficult to sew, because every time it reaches a baffle, for instance right here, there is a piece of the bottom side that is tucked and folded over and then sewn together. And that allows the back side to be so much bigger, and you shrink it down on the sides. The reason you do that is so that it will loft down when you hang it under your hammock. And so that is definitely nice to have. There are baffles in each of these sections here. I think it was maybe 1.25 inches is how big the baffle was. And that just prevents, there's no sewing the two sides together. There's always that 1.25 inch gap between the top and the bottom. So that's really important for loft. And then I've got the channels sewn in on all corners. One side has the full stretch cord here that will go from the ends of the hammock and hold it into place. And then the other side is what scoops around you in the hammock. So that will kind of taco you in there nice and tight. So there's, I mean, it's a pretty simple design. There are probably easier ways of doing this than I did, but I am a brand new sewing machine user, so definitely lots to learn. So anyway, let's head outside and show you how this hangs, and then you can watch the clips on how I put it together. I've got my hammock set up, and I have the underquilt ready to go. I'm gonna pull it out of a little stuff sack that I made for it and get this hung for the first time. I'm between rainstorms, so I'm gonna try and move fairly quickly here and get this done. It's been a long time making, so I'm excited to see how well this goes up. Okay, the first thing is find out which side goes to the bottom. And it's that one. Okay, very cool. So that's how it hangs on the hammock. And I've got these bungees that I can pull to change up the tension and also change the location of where it hangs too. So I think I'm going to climb in here and see how well this thing works. Now before I climb in, I can tell that after I pulled it out of the stuff sack, I'm going to have to redistribute the down throughout the bag, but for now I think it's going to be just fine. The down is definitely holding in all the places that I would need it to hold in. So off with the shoes. I'm going to climb on in. It's fun stuff, trying out something new for the first time. definitely should turn the other way so my feet are at the high end. Yeah. I'll tell you what, I can already feel that there is no cool breeze flowing from my back, which is something that happened last trip with no underquilt. Now I have these tabs here that I can pull to cinch up the bottom closer to me. So it's not far from here already, but oh yeah, I can actually feel the warmth, which is crazy that it's that quick. Oh yeah, that is awesome. Let's see what it's like when I turn to the side here. Very cool. So my feet are out just barely over here, and my head I think is out, but shoulders and everything else is definitely covered well. So I figure if I'm sleeping kind of diagonal or sleeping more fetal position, this is going to cover everything I need it to and be great. So far I'm liking it a lot. Now if I needed this to be a little tighter, I could simply cinch this down on the side, but that seemed to be coming up pretty good already. So I think it's good, and I'm going to be ready for my first trip out in about a week and a half. So it should be exciting. To begin sewing this underquilt, I have the 0.66 ounce 10 taffeta nylon taped out to the floor here. Now, Rip Stop by the Roll sent 114 inches of this. It's supposed to be 3 yards, but they're pretty good about giving a little extra. So 60 inches across the top, 114 across the long ways. And so my plan here is to cut this at 59 inch and 55 inch. So that gives a smaller piece and a bigger piece. And on the smaller piece, I'm also going to trim off some of the side to make that 56 inches and then have 60 here. So the 60 by 59 will be the larger piece, which will be on the bottom. And that gives room for that down to loft on the bottom. So let's make those cuts real quick. I'm going to be using this masking tape to make sure I have my lines where they need to be here. Make sure I have my markings right. I have this piece at 59 by 60, and now it's time to cut off about 4 inches on this side to give a total of 55 by 56. I've already started working on the baffles on the inside portion of the underquilt, and what I'm doing is measuring out so that the squares are 10 inches. So next I'm going to be moving on to the strips that go this way. I've already got all of these done and one row up here, and so now it's time to get this done. So basically what I've done is I started from one edge and measured out 13 inches. And then from there was my first point. And then I did the 5.5 inch for each baffle. And between had 4.5 inches. So 5.5, 4.5, 5.5, 4.5. And I made sure that I measured down from the top to get the same distance from that as well. So now what I'm going to do is use a, since I have a black piece of fabric here. I'm using a silver Sharpie, and so I'm just getting a basic idea of where I need to go, and then I use this to dot so that I make sure I can line up my fabric whenever I sew that in. After getting these channels cut and sewn together, I am putting the first side of the two pieces together. What I did was took each corner and I sandwiched the channel between the two sides. And I just sewed about maybe 4 or 5 inches on both corners. Then I went ahead and pieced together the channel all along on the short side, so that it was evenly spaced the whole way to one end. Then I decided to come back and sew the bigger piece to that channel. And the reason I did it that way is because there has to be these little gaps here where it is folded over, and that allows everything to come together. And where those are folded up at, there and there, is actually where the baffles are inside. So let me open this up here. So there's a baffle here. You can see it's about 13 or 14 inches from the side. And if you follow that up, that's where the first little fold over is. So now I am moving on to the very last fold over on the other side. And I didn't really measure, I'm just kind of eyeballing how much I am folding over. So this is what is left here on the end. And I just need to fold that over whenever I sew it in together, and that will bring the first side together with the channel. I have to admit, sewing the baffles together is a little bit more difficult than I originally expected. And it's not perfect by any means, but what I've been doing is I take tape measure and my Sharpie, and I'm measuring down 10 inches from one bevel to the next. So for instance, here, the next one's going to be 10 inches down here. And so I put a mark at 10 inches. And then I come from this side over here and measure out the same as the previous there to get to where that's going to be. So it's a little bit more intense than I was expecting. Now to start sewing the baffles, what I did was I took the measurement from one end to the other of the bottom and then the top, and I took the difference, and I found that the center point was a little off on this baffle in the middle, and so I just measured out and got the very first one done. And from that first baffle, I was then able to make my measurements off in each direction. So that's how I started. It's got right at 2.5 inches extra in the end pieces, and then the middles will just be lofted up like that. I'm also using a book under here to prevent the transfer from being made to the previous piece. So I'm just going to measure out 10 inches from this corner and put a dot. Not a very big dot, just one big enough to tell where it is. That way, whenever I pull this to the side, I can measure. So on this one, the previous piece was 18 inches from the end. So now I can come over here and say that this one actually needs to be an inch in. Okay, and now I know that my baffles are approximately 5 to 5.5 inches, so I can measure from here to here and see that I'm actually pretty well spot on with that bubble. So I'm going to dot it a little bit thicker. Now that one's ready to sew. I finished sewing the underquilt now. I'm going to open up this bag of down. This is 800 power fill. Now I've never worked with down before, and I hear that it is quite messy. So I'm here in my shower tub with the air turned off and the door closed, so hopefully I won't be having any drafts that will blow this around. Because I hear that it will just loft up and make a huge mess. So, okay, so I've got my underquilt with about 2 feet of open space here. Everything else has been sewn up. So I'm going to attempt to start filling this with the down by just grabbing handfuls tightly and shoving it in here. I'm going to see how well that method works. Yeah, this is going to make such a mess. Alright, I'm going to close the curtain now and get to work and show you what it looks like when this is done. So the advice that is given about working with down in your shower, I would have to 100% agree with that. Definitely a good place to do this because you can gather it up a little easier when it gets away from you. Because this stuff right here is fluffy. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, it sticks to everything like static cling. Could you imagine the factory where this is gathered? It must be quite an allergen facility. Phew. So I've just barely touched the top of this and I've already filled 1 full side, very full. So I'm gonna have to shake that towards the middle of the quilt and get it more distributed before I move on. But it's just, I've never worked with this before and it's very incredible how fluffy this stuff really is. So what have I learned about working with down? Well, first thing is, don't try to blow into the bag to push things down. Well, that was a mistake. The next thing is, it is going to make a mess. And what I should have done is get a vacuum cleaner ready with some kind of cloth or pantyhose over the suction part so that I could have cleaned this up quickly. So what I'm going to try to do is knock off the fluff and go get the vacuum cleaner so I can clean this up a little bit more easily. I may have overstuffed this a little bit, but I think it's going to be good. In an attempt to clean up this down, I've got my vacuum cleaner hose with some of this mesh that I used for my hammock bug net. And I'm just making a little cup in there and then vacuuming it up as best I can. And when it stops pulling, I just am removing this, and it's got a lot in there, believe it or not. And I'm just attempting to stuff it back into the bag without disturbing too much more of the old stuff that was in here. It's not exactly easy.